Hello, this is Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to this, the recording of our program on August 25th, 2023.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming on a beautiful day like today. As I always start these programs out, I mention that I'm Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods. I am almost finishing my first year of my third three-year term, and this will be my last term, so we're looking for fresh blood. So if you feel like it, let's have you step forward. First, let me ask members of our board to either stand or raise their hands. We have 3 at the back, plus actually 4 at the back, 1 here, and moi, of course. If you have ideas for future programs or have heard a speaker that is local that you think we might add to our repertoire for our 2024 season, which we're in the process of putting together, we would really like to hear from you. And if there are some other projects you think that might be helpful, please make the recommendations. One thing I would ask, and I've not actually thought of this before, and I don't know why, was please put your cell phones on silent so that you can pay attention to each and every syllable that's coming from our speaker's presentation. So our next program, by the way, pardon moi, I will get in trouble with Greg Major, our secretary, if I don't pass this out. We maintain a contact list that has 284 listings on it, and occasionally they go stale and we get a return. So if you've not received emails lately, it is a Gmail account, so check your junk mail first. But if you haven't received emails from us, sign this thing, okay? So if you'll pass that around, please, and hopefully it will make its way around to each and every one of you. Our next program will be actually downstairs in the lower level on Friday, September 22nd, starting at 10:30 a.m. Our speaker will be King George County historian Bob O'Neill, whose subject will be important riots, the cavalry battles of Aldie, Middleburg, and Upperville. I mean, who knew? Right? Now he has been a speaker here before, so I'm sure you'll want to come and hear him again. Sadly, I will be out of state that day, so Jack, our vice president, will be in charge, so good for you. So our speaker today is our very own vice president, Jack Phend. He's been a member of our board since 2016. He's vice president because at an annual meeting he was not there, and we had held elections. But he's stepped up to the plate. Thank you, Jack. Additionally, his stewardship of our fundraising golf tournaments in years past has allowed us to continue our installation of historical interpretive panels and other efforts. He's also been an interpreter at Ellwood Manor since 2012. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Valparaiso University. Did I pronounce that right? Valparaiso, okay, that's close. Indiana. And MA from Northwestern University in theater arts. Jack is a professor emeritus in theater with 34 years in higher education and professional theater. He also taught in Costa Rica and England. He currently makes a study of the Civil War in Virginia. So, with that, I give you Jack. And by the way, the table settings that you see notwithstanding, we're not feeding it.
That's why you're all here, right? I told you all that lunch was on Charles. Let me gear up here. And thank you for the introduction, Charles. Thank you very much for coming. I love seeing your smiling faces. I hope they will still be smiling when I finish. Okay. Anyway, so I'm about to begin. Just want to get a couple of things situated here. I want to say, as Charles sort of pointed out in his introduction to me, very kind introduction, I've been a student of the Civil War for a number of years now. What I mean is I am not a historian or a research scholar. This is material that other people have developed, and I'm bringing it together so because I think it's of interest. I hope you will find it of interest too. And so we'll, without any further ado, we'll go to this photo excursion that was taken in 1866 across our local battlefields by a team that included doctors and photographers. And so this is the Ellwood Plantation excursion of 1866. And some of the photographs that you will see, all of the photographs that you will see in this group are the first that were taken on the battlefields following the Civil War. Let me begin this way, we'll go back to the past. It's September 1865, and Northern journalist John T. Trowbridge is touring the war-torn wilderness region with a local guide when he stumbles upon unburied human remains. From his book, The South, a tour of its battlefields and damaged cities, he describes his macabre encounter in the depths of the wilderness. And what appalling spectacle is this? In the cover of the thick woods, the unburied remains of two soldiers, two skeletons side by side, two skulls almost touching each other like the cheeks of sleepers. I came upon them unawares. I picked my way among the scrub oak. I knew that scores of such sights could have been seen only a few weeks before, but the United States federal volunteers had been seen here, and they collected the unburied dead into two national cemeteries of the wilderness. And I hope that they had done their work faithfully. Well, it's North Carolinians. That's why they didn't bury them, said my guide Elijah, after a careful examination of the buttons that had fallen from the rotten clothing. The buttons may have told a true story. North Carolinians they may have been. Yet I could not believe that this is why they had not been decently interred. It must have been that these bodies and others that we found afterward were overlooked by the soldiers sent to construct the cemeteries. It was shameful negligence, to say the least. The cemetery was nearby.
I gotta turn it on.
The cemetery was nearby. A little clearing surrounded by a picket fence and comprising 70 trenches, each containing the remains of, well, I know not how many dead. Each trench was marked with a headboard inscribed, "Unknown United States soldiers killed May 1864. Elijah said, "Well, sir, these is United States soldiers," indicating plainly that it had not been the intention to bury any rebels there. As a grim joke on the neglect, someone had flung 3 human skulls over the palings and into the cemetery where they were blanching among the graves. And now, it's early 1866, and Colonel Ellwood Bontecou, the Napoleon of surgeons and the director of the sprawling Harwood Military Hospital in Washington, D.C., knew that his work was coming to a close. There were very few wounded who still remained at the hospital. He needed to request orders, gather his resources, and head to the former battlefields of Virginia before it was too late. His mission? Collect the damaged crania of the unburied dead. He planned to document his work photographically with the aid of his gifted assistant, portrait photographer, William Bell. And so let me give you some facts about this particular collection of photographs. Originally, there were 121 pictures taken. That's quite a collection. And all of them were for the same group of stereographic images taken over just 3 days, from Thursday, April the 12th, to Saturday, April the 14th of 1866. Unfortunately, now, no complete set of these stereographs exists anywhere. And in fact, it may be that a member of the party stole 29 views from this collection when he left the military service in 1867. And the worst part is that all of those wonderful glass negatives, which can these days be reproduced in exquisite detail, are all gone. Some of them may have left with a member of the party. The others may still be in the National Archives holdings, or possibly at Mar-a-Lago. But on the positive side, a trove of over 20 of these lost views were found just a little over 5 years ago. And so we'll want to get right to it and have a look at some of these images. I'll bet that some of you recognize this location. Where are we?
Wilderness Tavern?
It is Wilderness Tavern, the ruins of Wilderness Tavern. And what's out here? Ellwood Manor. I hope many of you have been there, and if you have gone to Ellwood, you will see this image display version on it on the grounds of Ellwood. The problem is that, again, that's pretty hard to see, isn't it? Right? However, here's the magic that happened in 2017. A second view was found. I figured we shouldn't hold back on this material. We'll show you what was discovered just recently. Okay, a new view, taken this time from the north side of the building, and it shows us some things that were a surprise and created a great deal of excitement among the historians of the Military Park Service in Fredericksburg and among the members of the Friends of Wilderness Battlefield. So here's the new discovery. First of all, 2 buildings which were quarters for those slaves who were enslaved people who cared for the immediate family. It was quite a surprise. We had no idea that there were buildings like this. They probably doubled also as kitchen and laundry for those who were working there. And another feature of this, there are a number of fruit trees. There's an orchard here. And for those of you who may know, one of the original conditions when the property was sold to William and Elizabeth Jones back in 1773, all the way back before the Revolutionary War, they were required to have an orchard. And we don't know how many trees were actually left by this time, but we can see 27 of them in the for those who are careful in counting. And also, one more, and another feature in the house, there is an enclosed porch on the north side, and this was again a surprise too, and a little different understanding that we had, right, about how those enslaved people could come into the house and serve the family, the Jones and Lacey family. And one more feature here in the foreground, that's the ice house, and that made Ellwood an excellent site for a recovery hospital after the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, ice available to cool wounds and fevers. Another thing that's worth noting here, I think, is that this place is plainly abandoned. There is no human activity here, no animals in sight. Fields are unplanted and fallow now. It won't be until for another year after this photograph was taken before the Lacey family will return and begin to bring life back to the land too, after the war and with new circumstances for themselves too. So here's another view of this. So an overhead contemporary view, and way up there at the top, that's Sheets. Okay. And the white arrow follows the line of the first photograph. The green arrow, the line of where the newly rediscovered photograph was taken. It's next to the Alexander Chapel Cemetery there. There was no Alexander Chapel Cemetery at that time, but you can see that there's a roadway which follows roughly the old line of the Orange Turnpike, as it was known, what we know as Route 20. And of course, Ellwood's down in the lower corner. Whenever you see a photograph in this presentation that has a green band around it, a green frame, it indicates that that is one of the newly recovered views. So, let's go on. I want to introduce you to two researchers, actually three researchers, who have a great deal to do with the recovery of images, of the collecting and identification of images in this set of Bontecou Bell photographs. And the first is a man by the name of Bob Seller. Have any of you ever gone on a tour with him or spoken with him? Yeah? Okay. Oh, good. Alan has. Okay, not surprisingly. I know he was a keynote speaker for the Central Virginia Battlefield Trust's annual conference just a few years ago. I'd love to meet him. He's been very helpful to me, very willing to share material. And he's the man who published the first article in his Civil War photographer publication back in 2017 to announce to the world that these new photographs had been found. And by the way, I don't think I've said that they were located in the American Antiquarian Society location up in Worcester, Massachusetts. They were newly digitized at that time, and one of Bob's friends recognized them and reported them to him. Also, how about this person? You know John Cummings? He's when we talk about local historians, sometimes these are people who are living in a dusty basement somewhere and fiddling with old papers and so forth. Well, John Cummings is quite active and does a great deal of lecturing and tour guiding around our battlefields locally. He's from Spotsylvania. He's done a great deal to preserve land in that particular battlefield area as well. We'll tell you more about the sign that he's holding here just shortly. But we'll mention as a prelude to John's work that a man by the name of Wendell Lang Jr. from the state of New York began to take notice of this particular group of photographs, recognized that unidentified stereographic views that he was finding were all part of this original set, and he began to research it. And he was corresponding with Noel Harrison at the military parks here in Fredericksburg when, unfortunately, he died prematurely in his 50s. And who was to pick up the work? Well, John did. And he promised his publisher, he's published several local history books, he promised his publisher in 2004 that he was going to come forth with a volume on this set. Not yet. It's 19 years ago. I think he got so, he's very precise in what he does in terms of researching locations for each image that he comes across, and he may have gotten lost in his work a bit. So maybe if he finds out that people are talking about these images and waiting for his book, I'm really anticipate its publication. Anyway, maybe he'll get around to finishing that project up. I hope so. All right. But let's jump back into the past once more and introduce you to the people who were responsible for this photographic collection. This is Colonel Reed B. Bontecou, who was known as the Napoleon of surgeons in his day. He was a graduate of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, among other people who also graduated from there is our Chair Emeritus, Dr. Pete Rainey. Okay. And anyway, he became chief surgeon and director of Harwood Hospital in Washington. That's that huge hospital that existed in the northeast part of the city, near the soldiers' home. Walt Whitman was one of the men who cared for soldiers at that location, and he wrote about some of the men that Dr. Bontecou had treated, men who were hospitalized, and think about that, with wounds that would not heal, and never did, and that they were there suffering for years, or in some cases, before they passed away. Well, Bontecou did what he could to produce successful surgical revisions, but he was not always successful, of course. Anyway, you'll see him in the photographs in this series too. So here's Harwood Hospital. Just as a reminder, thousands of men who were sick or ill could be treated at the hospital during the war, and you'll see, maybe you've seen pictures of the wards there. Kind of recognize one of these perhaps. Anyway, Bontecou, as I said, carefully documented his work, and he became skilled as a photographer, at least minimally skilled as a photographer, and he took photographs of wounded men, and there are hundreds of these still in existence. I'm not going to show you more than just one. Some are very sad to look at, but we'll show you one of his successes. So this is Medal of Honor winner Henry Barnum, and now this is not a photograph taken by Bontecou. This was taken by his assistant, William Bell, who was a gifted portrait photographer before the Civil War. He'd served in the Army in the Mexican-American War as well as the Civil War, but then in 1863 he came to the hospital and began to work with Dr. Bontecou. So you can see it's wonderful portrait work, the use of light and shade, right? And they've set up a mirror so that you can see the exit wound. Barnum was shot through and through, as they say, at Malvern Hill in 1862, and he was left for dead on the battlefield. There was nothing that you could do for a man who had been shot through and through. But he didn't die. And he was removed after 2 days. He was taken to Harwood Hospital by steamship and recovered. Was wounded twice more, as it says here. And here is the photograph taken in 1865. And he may not have lived as long as he might otherwise have, but certainly, thanks to his good care, he did survive a long time. And this is William Bell. I have to say, it's hard to find pictures of a lot of photographers at this time. Selfies were not the word of the day. And here he is, he's an old man. He was in his 30s when he was doing the work with Bontecou, but he continued to work in photography. He's a wonderful chemist and an artist, and he developed skill at dry paper photography. And here's one of the samples, again, a stereograph from tours that he did of expeditions that were taken in the federal government to the west. And you can see he's used the chiaroscuro, highlight and shade just brilliantly in the photograph. And it's like one of these great American landscape panoramas that you see, the small human figure dwarfed by the beauty of nature. But who gets credit for the photographs? A guy by the name of G.O. Brown, George Oscar Brown. I have no photograph of him, but I will say that John Cummings has chased him like a bloodhound. He has done what he can to hunt him down. Found out that George was born in the Finger Lakes district of New York, became an orderly at the hospital. Apparently he never was a battlefield soldier. And he got interested in working with Bontecou and Bell at the hospital, and so he has taken many of the exposures, we'll call them, on this journey. John Cummings considers him a little more than a trained monkey. But after the war, he did become a photographer, opened a photographic studio in Baltimore, and lived on there throughout his life. And here then is the back mark he used on some of the photographs that he had, that he apparently removed. Whether they were with permission or without, it's just not known. But he took them from the hospital and kept them for his own and sold them, sold views for the next 20 years. Whatever happened to the glass negatives, we do not know. Okay. One of the things that John Cummings found out, and he thinks in a pointed way, Brown was buried in 1928 in the sprawling Green Mountain Cemetery in Baltimore, the same place where John Wilkes Booth was buried. So we'll start the tour. This is the first photograph in the series. It's number 3, and this is not an outtake from Mary Poppins. It is the rooftops of Fredericksburg. And the chimneys are not the object of the photograph. In fact, out here, that is Marie's Height, that ridge, and in that circle is Brompton, the current president of Mary of Washington University's home. And of course, and that's why it was being photographed, it was the site of one of the hospitals in Fredericksburg at the time of the Overland Campaign. So if you look way over on the right, you see a wagon in the street. That's William Street. You see it? Okay, that's probably one that belonged to the Bell Bontecou party. Okay, so we're going to saddle up and ride. Before we do, just to point out that this is the photograph was taken from the Planters Hotel. Okay. From that window. Okay. This is the kind of research work that John Cummings does about these photographs. Next stop, do you recognize this location? It's a newly discovered view again. I don't think people were stopping for Chick-fil-A.
Salem Church.
It's Salem Church. Very good. So they go on from here. And this is the route that was taken over the 3 days. The red arrows will follow the path that they took the first day. The second day is in gold and covers really what we know as the wilderness battlefield. But this area and all 3 of these battles took place in part in the wilderness of central Virginia. And those battles, each of them, left many men on the battlefields, unrecovered. All right, so it's out then to the next church. This is the original Wilderness Church. Okay, it's been replaced. It was fairly significantly damaged during the Jackson flank attack, and But I think what was going on here is they may have come out here to meet another guide to bring along on this tour. And then they would go back to an important site. I'm sorry, I skipped it, didn't I? That's well here. Sorry. Okay. This is the site of Stonewall Jackson's wounding. Okay. And you see three. Can you see four people in the picture? There's one man over by a small bush, and he's an unusually small man. He's probably no taller than 4 feet. Okay, and he's often seen in these views. He carries an axe or a shotgun in some cases, and obviously he was going along to help clear the area, and probably as a local man. We don't know who. I don't know who he is. Anyway, so the reason I banded this picture in red is because on the wilderness battlefield, this photograph is shown at the site of James Longstreet's wounding. It isn't. It sort of is implied that that's where on the Orange Turnpike this picture is taken. It's not. It's taken back on what we know as Route 3 today. Right? And the man who is seated is Vess Chancellor. He's one of the tour guides. Standing next to him is Reed Bontecou. Up the road a bit is Vess's younger brother, George Chancellor. And those two men were members of the Confederate service. Vess was a member of Jeb Seward's cavalry, one of his favorite scouts. And these men knew this area well, and they're the ones, along with James Horace Lacey and James Fowler Smith, who determined where the markers for the Jackson wounding were placed. And I'm talking about the quartzite boulder and later the marble monument. Okay.
Those planks on the right?
Are they what?
Is that road planks on the right side, right corner of the picture?
Yes.
Yes, but behind the trunk, you can see, looks like planks.
Oh, yes, yes, and this is the orange plank road, okay, but you can also see, it's kind of fun, well, okay, there's a tree that fell across the plank road, and the other thing is that if the plank road is not maintained, you're not going to travel on it, you're going to travel next to it, and so you can see that that's what's been going on here, right? And then it's down to business, and here, they came across this site. Now, if John Trowbridge was upset by seeing two dead, what's he going to say about this? Okay. The men of the 1st Volunteer Veterans Regiment who came to collect bodies beginning on June the 10th of 1865 were not medical people. They were not anatomists or forensic scientists. They were just men who wanted to have the remains of their comrades collected and buried decently. Okay? But what that meant was that they would gather the remains of 10 people, and I think if you count the skulls, I get 9. But they're one short. Okay? And other associated parts of the skeleton remains. And that's what you get. And that was placed into a canvas bag that was later then placed into a coffin, and this collective burial was done. That's the temporary burials, and then bodies were taken to the permanent cemetery in Fredericksburg beginning in 1866. Back to Chancellorsville. There's George Chancellor doing something. You always see him, he's wearing a light colored coat and a pair of broad striped trousers. Okay. Also, one of the wagons, which you can see, in fact, are Civil War era ambulances that were being used by this party, okay, as they collected remains. Anyway, don't stand in Ely's Ford Road and Route 3 today, don't try it. And then the final stop for the day is the home of the father and mother of Vess and George Chancellor. Melzy Chancellor was pastor at Wilderness Church and also New Hope Church and a couple of other churches, small country churches in this area. Okay? And you see several men from the party standing in the yard here, and it's a lousy photograph, and we credit it to G.O. Brown. Apparently wasn't so good at counting to 3 and getting an even distribution of chemicals over the glass plates. So, but this is another thing that I want to make sure I do get to today, and that is these wonderful photographs that were found in 2017 too. They're of the people who struggled and suffered and survived in the wilderness. So we begin with Melzy's family. And so this is the work of a portrait artist, okay? Nicely composed, rhythmically. It's, of course, this is black and white photography, but it varies the lights and the darks together. And so we see Vespasian, Vess, Chancellor, standing there, standing in his coat. George seated next to Melzy. Melzy's wife, Lucy, standing with her hand on his shoulder. And the eldest daughter of the family, Anna Cora, behind Melzy. And one of the other sisters, we're not quite sure which one, is there at the side too, one of the younger sisters. And then this is Melzy Jr. at Melzy Chancellor's feet. And what a wonderful picture. Melzy Jr. ought to get a hard candy for his work here, because he held so still. He did this perfectly. And it's really hard to get good photographs of children. Okay, but they did it here, thanks to his help. Just to show you again the lie of the land here, the gold circles mark the location of homes of people who were photographed here. You can see that the Chancellor and Hawkins homes are just right across from each other, and the red circle there is Wilderness Church. I've marked Ellwood and Spotsy Courthouse so that you could get an idea of the lay of the land here. I'm going to show you a couple of these photographs anyway. This one we must mention too. The back plate describes this photograph as the Hawkins girls who lived on the battlefield and saw sights. Well, they sure did. They were their house was overrun by the Jackson flank attack. Their home had been occupied by Army of the Potomac officers, and by the way, there are 8 sisters altogether and 2 brothers to this family, so. As I understand it, just 2 weeks ago, by chance happened to meet Julie Hawkins, the wife of the current owner. It's Jim and Julie Hawkins, who live there on this property. Their son John is farming it for them now, and promises to. He's going to move into a renovated house that is set back away from the road. You can see it, and right now, and it's the white house, the white frame house that was actually built in 1924. Which is now stripped out to its outer structure. And some of the boards of that house are from the original home that they lived in, small 1-story home. But 6 of the girls continued to live there along with one of the sons, okay, for a long period of time. And 5 of these women are buried in the family cemetery behind the house. You can see once again it's good artistic photography that's been used here too. I want to tell you this story just quickly, that when the Confederate troops on the flank attack boiled out of the woods and came across the fields of the Hawkins farm. Several of the girls came out onto the porch and began waving and cheering. Okay? And one of them seemed to be maybe doing something a little bit different. She seemed to be waving and yelling at the Union soldiers to get out of there, because she apparently, Huldah, and I'm going to make a guess, there's no confirmation of this, but I think this is Huldah. She came out to warn the Yankees. And after the war, it says she had developed an interest in one of those Union soldiers, and after the war, she corresponded with him. Anyway, there you go. Just to show you again, pinpoint where this is. The photograph is taken on the porch, and as you can see, of the Dowdell's Tavern, Melzi Chancellor's home. And you see the red X coming up on the map that shows you the spot where Jackson was wounded in the very first place that the men who collected him and the other wounded soldiers at that location tried to come to Dowdell's Tavern to gain help, but they found 30 Union soldiers already being cared for at that site. So they went on down the road and out to the surgical hospital of the Confederacy out at the Wilderness Tavern. Three other figures here, the Stevens and Trigg family members. We don't know which of the girls is which. One is Matilda, one is Lucy, but Lucy would marry Alex Hawkins, the brother of the women we just saw on the porch in the other photograph. You have noticed how elegantly the women are dressed. They're dressed to the absolute nines. They're wearing earrings, obviously their famous hats and so forth, and they just look really great in these photographs. On the second day, this is the way it began. It ended with those photographs that you've just seen. But out to Wilderness Tavern, again, this is a new view that was never seen before, and we're traveling on the Gold Path from there, on past Ellwood, out to Saunders Field, where cemetery number 1 was located in the southwest corner. And just to point out here, depends on who's giving the account. Somewhere between 19 and 35 graves were in the cemetery. So that means somewhere between 190 and 350 unknown soldiers were buried there. On across the wilderness to, let's see, there's George at the Confederate works at the west end of Saunders Field. And then on to the cemetery number 2, and that vicinity at the intersection of Rock and Orange Plank, what we know as Route 621, over near Fawn Lake. And then in the woods, this find. Okay. And 3 men, 3 Confederate soldiers on the battlefield. John Cummings, look carefully, there are actually a series of 3 photographs taken of these remains, and one of them shows the center skull having been removed and turned upside down. And John Cummings has identified that skull, and it's in that collection of 24 skulls that Reed Bontecou took, and it's now in Silver Spring at the National Museum of Health and Medicine. And you can see why Bontecou took it. You see 2 fractures of the skull, one across the bridge of the nose and one across the forehead. There's also a piece of the skull behind or above the right ear, also missing. The height of surgery at this particular time the best that could be done for soldiers was amputation. But you can't amputate that, right? So it was Reed Bontecou's hope. This was a purposeful, not a peculiar attempt. He wanted to explore what the fractures of the skull looked like so that perhaps there was something that could be done for people with head wounds. And he has a number of people that he documented who had some awful head wounds too. Okay, there's a collection of other photographs that were taken of the dead that still remained on the battlefield in 1862. And then to show you that there are a whole bunch of photographs too within this collection that are peculiar to us. You know, the forest changes, it doesn't remain the same. And they took photographs of how shot and shell had destroyed trees and foliage in the woods. But we don't know where these are because the woods heal themselves, right? And so it's impossible to locate exactly where they are. But there are many photographs of this sort, too, just to mention them. Okay, last stop of the day is at the Carpenter's farm, and there is Mary Carpenter doing a little spring gardening. It's April after all, and there's a hog doing hog things. And the cabins there were used by the Army of the Potomac Second Corps during the Battle of the Wilderness, in fact, to care for injured men, severely injured men in some cases. And so there is also on that site, on Herndon Road, okay, which has been explored also by John Cummings. Here's Reed Bontecou in what is a rather poignant photograph, I think, overlooking individual graves. These, again, had not been previously collected because in this case these men had been properly buried as best they could be until the establishment of the federal cemetery. And one of these markers was of a grave. They were able to find the family of this soldier, and he was returned home rather than to the cemetery in Fredericksburg. Third day was saw the group travel to the Bloody Angle, and there are several photographs there, particularly one that was taken here where men from the volunteer force that had collected bodies in June of 1865, they took one of the headboards, painted it, and posted that marker on this tree that it survived the battle. And it is the first stanza of a poem that was very popular at that time by a man by the name of Theodore O'Hara, The Bivouac of the Dead. On Fame's eternal campground, their silent tents are spread. Glory guards with solemn round the bivouac of the dead. And on the present Fredericksburg Cemetery, you'll see plaques that are mounted and that have various stanzas of this very poem. And you see our members of the tour, including the rather short man standing on the parapet there. Another angle of that view of that same tree, you can see somebody decided they would like to cut it down to take it as a souvenir. This and many other trees there were skinned completely, cleared of their bark. That's a height of about 10 feet by just musket fire at the Bloody Angle. Okay, that shows the intensity of the fighting there, which went on for 24 hours over the day and night of May 12th into May 13th, 1864. And men began to club one another and bayonet one another in the mud. Men dying, 3, falling, 3, 4 deep, the dead on top of the living, and so forth at that point. Anyway, John located the position of that tree using his replica of the sign and also a model of the pool house, which you saw in that previous image. watching the length of shadows and so forth to determine the exact minute when this photograph was taken. These men have markers, Union markers, but they're Mississippians, okay? And their graves had been previously marked, but the men of the volunteer regiment placed these new markers when they were on this site, along with other individual markers for other men who had died. Apparently they tried to remove the bodies of the dead, here the Union dead, but they hadn't completely dried. They hadn't desiccated yet. They're not skeletal remains. There's too much there. So they buried them as best they could and left them. They also, of course, visited some of the incredible trench work that had been done at other sites on the battlefield. Final stop in Spotsylvania Court is this. This is right opposite what was called, at that time built in 1855, I think, the new courthouse. Okay, but this is the Spotswood Inn. And the man who owned the Spotswood Inn was Joseph Sanford. And when William Sherman had come through with his men after the war on his way to the grand, what do we call it, the grand parade in Washington, D.C.
Grand Review.
The Grand Review, thank you, I'm sorry. Sanford prevailed on Sherman to have his men bury as many men as he could on the battlefield. And so there were many who were buried at that time. When the volunteers came by a month later, they were already decently interred, at least temporarily. And you see the equipment of the group. Now they go then back to Fredericksburg. It's the end of their tour, and we get to the last photograph in the series, numbered 121. This is the sunken road, and you see it's mushy, muddy, wet, and so forth. Their documentation that there was an incredible rainstorm on the late afternoon or early evening of Saturday the 14th with wind, rain, and hail, and so that's why the road is in this condition. And you can see the wall along the sunken road where at the time of the Battle of Fredericksburg, what they call the slaughter pen was, where the Confederates stood at the wall and mowed down line after line of Army of the Potomac men under Burnside. And a close up. And there's Mary Innes in her yard watching the photographers in action. Well, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of our area. Some sources, and just letting you know, of course, Charles has the gift of being able to transfer the presentations that are done and the PowerPoints that we use to our website. And please, if you wish to find out more, look at the sources and so forth of any of these views, you can find them here. So thank you. Bob, you had a question?
Well, I would just add a comment. I was lucky enough to John Cummings led a walking tour of the Spotsylvania battlefield and gave the photos, copies of the photos to the participants. I don't know if anybody else was here, might have been on that walking tour. John Hennessy was the park personnel. One of the most memorable tours that I've done in this area. It was phenomenal. And you stood the way John arranged it, you would stand where the camera was and look at the viewscape today, and you'd have the photo, to compare that with, and it was pretty powerful. The only comment I would make, tremendous job, but there's so much here to do, and you did a phenomenal job. You can pay me later. The only comment I would make on it was the U.S. colored troops that actually were involved in gathering the remains of the skeletal remains. And my understanding is you pick up a skull and you pick up 2 or 3 major bones and drop it in your bag. And when you got up to where your bag was pretty full, and you dump it into the box and you count 6, 8, 10, whatever it was, and then they would nail the lid on the box and you put that number on it. And then when you go up to the cemetery today, the marker will have a number on it, whatever that number is, 7, 8, 10, and that tells you how many unknown. And both the Confederate and the Federal cemetery, I think the biggest foot stomp in all of this is that probably 80-85% are unknown. We just, and the Federals were no better than the Confederates, and the Federals were similar. I think the Confederates is like 15%, and the Union is 13% or something. They're unknown. So, but all the rest of these folks are just, they're just numbers. That's all they are.
It's true. Thank you, Bob, for that observation. And there were these men who were in the 1st Volunteer Veterans Regiment, came from various places. They were volunteers, obviously, and they volunteered because they had fought across, in many cases, so in many cases they had fought across these battlefields and lost comrades there. And there's a wonderful diary entry from a man from the 14th Indiana Regiment who describes a search in Fredericksburg for a grave of one of his companions who had died there. He wanted to find out if it was still there and so forth. So, right in the Fredericksburg National Cemetery, Union only buried there, of course, because those were the Confederates were not citizens. 15,000 burials approximately, and 12,000 plus are unknowns. Right? Sorry, Greg.
Can you talk a little bit about Lakewood Woods as Lakewood Woods Church? And as you know, Jack, there's a memorial over there here that Lakewood Woods Church. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that marker?
Very briefly, the marker was placed there by the Civil War Study Group. Which year?
2015-ish or
15.
something.
That's what I'm thinking. And it indicates a couple of quotes on there from Union and then from Confederate generals who indicate how many men were left on the battlefield. Let's say this, that just a couple of numbers, population type numbers. At this time, in 1865-66, there are about 5,000 citizens in Fredericksburg. 5,000 people at that time. The freed people have not returned in mass yet. I can't wait to find out what's going to happen, right? But so there are about 5,000 citizens in Spotsylvania County, and about 5,000 in Orange County. 15,000 people. How many died here? Well, if you take the count of the 3 battles, there are that's about 16,000 men who died here. Many of them died in hospitals. But in addition to that, there are about 12,000 listed missing. What do we want to say? At least half of those were dead. Right? The idea was if you reported someone to be missing, you weren't saying they were dead, and that's a lot better news to give somebody then they're dead. Okay, and so, and so, I think, I mean, just 18,000, 20,000 dead on these battlefields, and all the VVR recovered about 1,500 bodies in their time. Okay, that's all, but it's got to be, that's why this is hallowed ground. And people were, you know, these men, this group was touring the battlefield at this time, right? But they're not the only people out there at all. They, is this the one? No, I think it was the year before, they, when the volunteer veterans were there, that they encountered a woman who was looking for her son on the battlefield, what would have been Spotsylvania. And they helped her eventually to find her son, and he was able to, she was able to take him home. But that's pretty rare. Clive.
At the Salem Church, Dr. Todd, the brother of Mary Todd Lincoln, treated Confederate and Union soldiers. She lost brothers on both sides.
Thank you, yeah. It's, yeah, and I know I think we're out of time today, but
That's quite a story.
yeah, but thank you so much. And the other thing I just wanted just to close saying, when you look at what was happening 160 years ago now, and compare the way we view death, what has to be done under those circumstances and so forth, what these people who were photographed had to live through and so forth is quite different, and sometimes people today maybe lose their sense of understanding and compassion for the people who went through these things at that time and did the things they did. I mean, what would we think? What would we think of a guy like Bontecou going over a bunch of dead people and taking some stuff off to go experiment with them? Yeah, but that this is now. There was knowledge that we have now wasn't had then. That's all I'm saying. So, anyway, thank you so much for coming today.
That was your mechanical. Thank you, Jack. That was really a fascinating presentation. So you're still the vice president, even though you did an excellent presentation.
I'd like to be the vice president.
Did I say president?
No.
Vice president, okay.
President.
You can be president if you like. Anywho, we have with us today the president of the Friends of the Wilderness Battlefield, Bob Lookaville, who has asked for a moment or two to give some shameless promotion. So, Bob.
I'm not sure how shameless it is, but we've got some activities coming up in September that we would love to have you folks come out and participate in. On the 23rd, we're going to do a tour. We're going to offer 2 tours of Mine Run Battlefield. If you've not gotten out and explored Mine Run, that's our big push right now, since we're no longer pushing Ellwood at this point. But we'll get some information out on that. But it'll be a couple of buses, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, free. You know, if you want to throw a few bucks our way, we're not going to turn it down, but it's free. And then the following weekend, we'll have some folks on site, some interpreters. If you want to do a little walking tour or just come out and kind of poke around at Payne's Farm, we'll be out there on Saturday the 30th of the month and talk with you a little bit about Mine Run. And like I say, it's an underappreciated battlefield, right here in the background.
And if you will, just send that information and we'll post it on our website, okay? Thank you very much. All right. This is, all right, obviously I'm not doing something wrong. Thank you very much once again for coming, and hopefully we'll see you this time next month downstairs. Oops, Bob, look at that.
Same ground. Monday night at Harry's Ale House, we're doing a fundraiser. If you want to come out and have a steak, whatever, spend
Or a brew.
I think it's from 5 to 7.
This Monday?
Yeah, this coming Monday, sorry.
Great. I mean, Harry's Ale House at Harrison Crossing, and that sounds like a very liquid investment in
There'll be lots of
preservation.
stories to be
Yes.
told as well.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you very much for coming. Have a wonderful day.
Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.